Joining us now with more insight on the politics of the week, WGN political analyst Paul Lisnek.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Paul, let's start off with that video everyone's talking about, Tyre Nichols. First of all, we know that President Biden has spoken with the family today. Also, whatever happened to police reform?
You know, there was this effort, and you remember it back in 2021 between Republican Senator Tim Scott and Democratic Senator Cory Booker. And we thought they had a deal. They announced they had a deal, and it all fell apart at the end. And the problem seems to be that Democrats want to see a lot more components to limiting immunity of cops in any of these bills, and Republicans are looking to have more and more resources for police officers. So that fell apart. It surprised everybody. But by the way, the previous year in 2020, there was another effort to pass a bill that was actually motivated by Republicans, which would have eliminated chokeholds and done some other things. And Kamala Harris, who was a senator at that time, she blocked it, saying it was just giving lip service.
Is it true that there are no federal laws right now concerning all police? Right now, it's up to the different communities, right?
It is true that it's up to communities or states to pass what they want. And it's not that there are no laws on the books, but what we're looking for are the issue of reform and what can they change. And that's what we're not seeing a lot of. Now, you know, we might see it as a result of this incident now, because one of the interesting components to it is that all the officers involved, as you know, were African American. Right. So it removes that piece of the racial issue. And so perhaps the issue is about police reform. The victim always seems to be African American. I understand that.
But it still is a race issue because they treated these police officers differently than they have white officers in the past.
And I'm talking about how it is that senators might be able to buy onto it in terms of their explanation, but we'll see where it goes.
We'll see if this is a step further into that space. Let's change topics here. Former Vice President Mike Pence acknowledged that he made mistakes with classified documents. That followed President Biden's handling of the documents, and now other presidents being investigated or at least checked on to see what they've done with their documents. Does this all make it more difficult to prosecute former President Donald Trump?
It probably does. Nobody has documents until they have the documents, right? And you're right. No, Obama and Clinton, everybody's been probably Jimmy Carter has been asked to check the closets. Who knows what's around? The bottom line to it, though, I think is going to be this. Look, there is, and depending on people's, views on politics, they're trying to combine whoever to whoever. The bottom line is that the Biden situation and the Pence situation legally are the most alike. Both claim they didn't know that they had these documents. Both immediately turned them over. The Trump situation is different. He refuses to turn them over. And then there's some who are arguing, well, Trump was president, had been president. The other two were not president, so he has a power they don't have. But the reality is that vice presidents can declassify documents. That was a power extended under the Obama administration through an executive order. So that argument doesn't fly. But the bottom line is this all works its way up. Here's my best guess. The suggestion that goes to Merrick Garland would be to potentially prosecute former President Trump because of the obstruction issue, not because he had documents. They all had documents.
So you think it'll still go forward then?
I think it will get up to Garland with that suggestion, but Garland, who has to deal with the political fallout of it all, I think in the end the smart money is that that's not where he goes. There was a time, Ray, that would have been the best place for him. If you want to get President Trump, go after the documents Mar-a-Lago thing. Not anymore.
Wow. Everybody's popping up now.
Yeah.
Okay, February 28th, mayoral election as well as the aldermanic elections, but right now we're focusing on those 9 candidates running for mayor. Chuy Garcia, one of the candidates who's running, is under fire because of having ununiformed or off-duty police officers in their uniforms in a staged campaign.
Yeah, as you know, Mike, you can't do that.
No.
You can't. Now, it's one thing if he had file footage of him with some cops.
It was an event where he was.
There are ways to do it, right? But not the way he did it. And so he got called out on that. And of course, there's the FTX money. He also stepped down off of the House subcommittee that deals with digital currency. He says it was his choosing to do that. He wasn't pushed off the committee. That Democrats pretty much only get one committee this time around. To get 2, you got to get a waiver. And he gave that one up to work with infrastructure. That's his explanation. Okay.
Why do you think Mayor Lightfoot is targeting him right now? Because there are 9 of them total, but she's after him.
Well, because right now, of course, he often shows a lead in the polls. But secondary, I believe, Micah, that she actually would prefer to go against Paul Vallis. And the reason is because, of course, Chuy presents himself as a progressive, as Lightfoot does. And I think her vision, and she might disagree with this, but I think her vision is if the progressives sort of split between her and Chuy, Garcia, Congressman Garcia, that's what kind of, we all know. Right? But that's what pushes, Vallis in and makes him potentially one of those candidates. If in the end it is Vallis against Lightfoot, I think the way she views it is progressives, while they aren't thrilled with Lightfoot, they don't like Vallis, and they would go her way. I think that's the thinking strategy right now.
Not helping her campaign is this fiasco involving Chicago public school students in her campaign. She did quite a bit of flip-flopping, it seemed, I think. Do you think that does much damage to her run here?
Yeah, and as you know, that started with everybody does it in big cities, down to the staffer did it, not me. I think the better way would have to have handled it right off the front was just own it. You're the mayor. Own it. Even if it's a staffer, I'm the mayor, the buck stops with me. We didn't quite get that, although she certainly admitted it was wrong. But the bottom line to it, Ray, and of course Lourdes Duarte did a great study on that last night that we saw. I'm not sure voters care about that issue. I don't know how much they get it. Go to an average voter and say, what do you think of the mayor sending an email trying to offer positions to students who were going to campaign for college, for credit? I think most people would say, I don't know, is there anything wrong with that? Well, there is something wrong with it. There's ethical issues wrong with that. But does it impact voters? I don't think it has the gravitas that maybe some issues like money or that kind of thing would have in voters' minds. And finally, voters tend to vote in a city election on this mayor thing. They tend to vote on environmental factors like violence and the economy more so than they do on the personality of the candidates.
Let's talk quickly about this letter that Governor Pritzker wrote to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, criticizing him for blocking an African-American AP course. Critical race theory. First of all, once and for all, tell people critical race theory is something they teach in law school about how law interferes or it's affected by race. That's what it's about. It's not about what they keep saying critical race theory is.
No, when you listen to the people who are constantly touting that, you'd think it's being taught in kindergarten and first grade. The reality of it is it's a graduate school and law school program. Harvard teaches a course in it. But this is one of those esoteric kinds of academic issues that, of course, many law students would ever like to get involved in. I think the interesting perspective you raised, Micah, from the Pritzker point of view is why is Governor,
why is he getting involved?
Yeah.
Right. This is the Florida governor who everybody expects will run for president, which, by the way, is why he's doing some of this stuff. He's trying to build up a base that he's got to kind of take from Trump if he can. So that's his choice to take that as a direction. But why is Pritzker responding to him in Florida? Pritzker would probably tell us, no, I'm responding to the issue overall, but maybe he is. The bottom line is, that's exactly it. I think, and right now, and again, if he were with us, he'd say, I'm not running for president. I'm running the state right now, and he is. But it's hard to believe he's not thinking about it, and that kind of effort exactly what points us into thinking that he's thinking of a possible 2024
Sunday morning show?
Sunday morning show is going to be very interesting. We're taking a look at the 25th ward. We've got the current alderman, Byron Sigcho Lopez, will be in. He just had triplets, by the way. And his opponent, Aida Flores, will be here. She is a progressive. He's a Democratic Socialist. We'll get the difference. And then we had Raymond Lopez on last week from the 15th ward. One of his challengers, Gloria Williams, she'll be in to talk about why people ought to vote for her. So we'll look at all of that.
Thank you, sir.
And I'll see you all on debate night.
Oh, right. Well, you can see and hear from all the 9 candidates, like you said, for mayor next Tuesday right here on WGN. Paul's joining us. The 90-minute forum will air live starting at 7 p.m. You can also stream the event on WGNTV.com and on the WGN Plus app. And Paul's joining us afterwards.
Thank you, guys. Pizza's on Ray.
Oh,
Okay, my turn. Okay.